Members, it's the appointed time, so let's get started. We are going to discuss 6 papers today, and before the meeting, the government submitted paper number EC 2018-19, number 5, for members' reference. The paper sets out the changes in directorate establishment approved since 2002 and the impacts of the change involved in the 6 discussion items on the directorate establishment. I remind members that if members have any direct or indirect pecuniary interests for the items to be discussed today, please disclose the nature of such interests before you speak according to Rule 83A of Rules of Procedure. And I'd like to call members' attention to the arrangements on voting in case of direct pecuniary interest according to Rule 84. Item number 1, which involves the CEDD and Highways Department. The proposed creation of 2 permanent posts of Chief Landscape Architect D1, each in the CEDD and Highways Department, with immediate effect upon approval of the Finance Committee to strengthen the landscape services provided by CEDD and Highways Department, with a view to enhancing the quality, sustainability, and livability of the outdoor environment. The government consulted the electrical development panel on the 27th of February on the proposal. And from the government, we have Mr. Liu Chensing, Undersecretary for Development, Ms. Joey Lam, Deputy Secretary for Development, Ms. Vina Wong, Head of Greening and Landscape Office from the Development Bureau, Mr. Lai Chek Ho, Deputy Director of CDD, Mr. Terence Lam, Assistant Director of CDD, and Mr. Cheng Hua, Deputy Director of Highways. Since the chairman of the development panel, Mr. Tommy Chung, is not a member of this member and cannot attend today's meeting, I would briefly walk members through the gist of the discussion by the panel. The development panel discussed this establishment proposal on the 27th of February, and most members supported the creation of a permanent Chief Landscape Architect post at the CDD and Highways Department to enhance the landscape services at the 2 departments and in turn Hong Kong's outdoor environment quality. Members from the Democratic Party opposed to the proposal and urged the government to create a dedicated civil service arborist grade. The government already addressed questions and views from members at the panel meeting, and some members requested additional information from the government to explain the mechanism of incorporating expert advice in the landscape designs of certain projects, as well as the government's developments and work on urban landscaping in the past 5 years, and the relevant paper CB brackets 1958 brackets 01 has been circulated with members. Mr. Ronnie Chan. And in January, the Finance Committee approved the creation of a CLA post, and for this proposal, 1 post will be created each in the CDD and HyD. And the Tree Management Office has created a number of Chief Architect posts. I consulted Mr. Paul Chair or Tony Chair on this. There are 8 landscape architects at the moment, but there is no CLA. So I have no objections towards the creation of such posts. My question is, with an identical post being created in 2 departments, would the 2 CLAs need to work with one another, and how would be the division of work? Would there be any redundancy in their work, or a lack of steer? For the Cheung Kwan O Park, the cherry blossoms have been very popular with the public, and many people take photos there. And are you going to introduce consistent plants at the slopes of the CEDD. Mr. Liu. Chairman, I'd like to thank Mr. Chen for his support. In our current plans, apart from the post of a CLA in the landscape office, a post was created in January at the Architectural Services Department after approval by the FC, and now we are creating 2 more CLA posts. The division of work is very clear, and they would take care of landscape-related work in their respective departments. In terms of coordination, the Development Bureau has a greening and landscape office, and the relevant chief landscape architects would take care of the work of the respective departments. Is there any mechanism for the 2 CLAs to meet each other and talk about the policies here? And that way the coordination between departments would be more effective. We do have a mechanism in place, so I would invite Ms. Lam to give more. Thank you. We do have a mechanism in place. The landscape architect grade has an establishment size of about 80, and we would carry out coordination and briefing. So it's important for them to communicate and work with one another. And we have facilitated exchanges among the staff. And we would make sure that the policies of the Development Bureau would be implemented on a department level. As for consistency in our landscaping work, the Development Bureau has urged the landscape architect teams to come up with thematic landscaping designs in order to create more spots for people to take photos. Ms. Eddie Chu, 5 minutes. Thank you. I met the Deputy Secretary earlier to discuss these posts, and I was rather positive at the time. But later I realized that there is an issue. Our city is becoming warmer and warmer and more crowded than before. And as we face climate change, this post would become more and more significant instead of having to work under any specific department. We discussed this $1.7 billion footbridge in Yuen Long, which was discussed at the Public Works Subcommittee. And the question is why the Highways Department has to build this footbridge, which would affect ventilation. Many members, including Mr. Tony Chair, had doubts about this project. So what role can a landscape architect play in this project? The architect can design landscaping under the footbridge near the escalators and lifts. This drawing came from an EIA report. This is just a rendering or impression. And in reality, no plants can be grown under the footbridge because there is no sunlight. At the electrical complex, you can see that some of our plants outside are not exposed to any sunlight. So the landscape architects could only choose better plants and just do their best to improve the landscape layout as a whole. If the CLA works under the Assistant Director of Highways, he can never play a more significant role. So instead of having a CLA under each department, would you set up a landscape unit and have the CLA lead the work? The CDD only deals with slopes and new towns, and for the highways department, they would only try to patch up highways and footbridges. Mr. Liu, thank you. I hope Mr. Chu would continue to support our proposal of creating these CLA posts. As for the job of the CLA, I would invite the Highways Department to supplement. As to whether the CLAs can play a bigger role, this is exactly what we are trying to achieve through this exercise. At new development areas, at the initial design stage, we would have a master design plan. We would have a master landscaping plan. If we have a chief landscape architect to provide directorate steer at that stage, our work would be more effective. Can the Deputy Secretary or the Undersecretary directly address the question? Would you set up a landscape unit? We have no such plans at the moment. After we create these two new CLA posts, we hope that they can offer better services to the new development areas and new towns. Mr. Jeremy Tan, followed by Mr. Tony Chen. The Civic Party supports the creation of these two CLA posts. Some members asked whether there would be a landscape office, but I'm afraid that there could be redundancy. Right now, the Highways Department has a group of landscape architects, and the same goes for CEDD. Other government departments also have landscape architects. So internally, how do you coordinate the work of all these landscape architects in terms of design and planning? Is there a platform for the architects to share their views and experience on a regular basis? Can they also share policy views based on shared principles? I do not want to see any redundancy, but I do not want to see them work independently of each other either. Thank you very much. Mr. Tam just raised a very realistic issue. And we actually carry out centralized grade management for these landscape architects. So I would ask Ms. Lam to offer more details. Mr. Tam was right that we do not want to see any redundancy either, and we want to see some connection between their work. So in terms of coordination, for landscaping work that needs to be done, we would issue technical guidelines and documents, and they must be adhered to by all technical departments. For example, for roads, trees must be planted, and some areas must be reserved for trees so that they can receive enough nutrients. So we constantly issue and update these guidelines.
Secondly, the Development Bureau is attaches a lot of importance to coordination among different departments. We do have coordinating committees regularly, and we would and thirdly, in terms of our grade management, we are very keen to ensure that all landscape architects would understand the government's philosophy regarding landscaping, and also we attach importance to the sharing of experience. So we do organize such activities so that there could be communication and exchanges among the landscape architects. And all the landscape architects, some of them have been trained overseas, and or if they've gone on duty visits, we would ask them to share the experience with those landscape architects who've not gone abroad for such duty visits. You said that they do a regular meeting. There are regular meetings among landscape architects to share experience. How regular are such meetings? Once every 3 months, 6 months, or what? Or are such meetings only convened when there is a need? Well, the coordination committee would meet once every 6 months. And we would meet, now that there is a need to pay great attention to tree management, we plan to meet more regularly. In terms of grade management, when we have new recruits, we would meet with them once. And they will also offer training, and we organize seminars for them as well. So it's quite regular. For your frontline arborists, how do they give you their feedback? Ms. Lam, could you answer that as well? Thank you. Ms. Wong, who is sitting next to me, is the chief landscape architects, and she would regularly visit them to find out the problems that they encounter and listen to the views. So Ms. Wong will talk to the landscape architects and find out what are the difficulties that they're encountering and whether they have any inputs or suggestions for her. And the Development Bureau will be able to obtain such feedbacks through Ms. Wong. So she works under Ms. Kwok. Okay. Mr. Tony Chair, thank you. I can say that as far as landscape is concerned, in the government's if you look at the government's civil service structure, I think this has been overlooked for a long time. The role, the 80 landscape architects, who are at the non-directorate level, there is only one landscape architect at the directorate level. Recently, in January, you appointed another directorate officer for the landscape architect's rank. So your landscaping policy, and when you map out your strategies. Now, if you do not have any directorate staff for this grade, it's difficult for them to participate in the policy formulation. the public's expectation for their environment and urban forestry, I think the expectations are becoming higher and higher. And therefore, you need to allow them to participate more actively in the formulation of your policies. As the representative of the landscape architects, we've been fighting for this for all along. Last year, we actually so the role of landscape architects is important, but they have been, the role has been overlooked for a long time. If you don't have any directorate steer for this grey, as you say in paragraph 3 of your paper, that the CEDD now is now for the landscaping unit is led by a chief engineer who does not really have the expertise. The original department, well, the department used to be called the landscaping, unit. You talk about landscaping rather than, talking about, the formulation of the blueprint or strategy at the early stage. So I think there's a need to therefore create a post of the CLA for the landscaping unit under the CEDD, and you rename it, and perhaps you can call it the landscape unit. According to the paper, you're proposing to create the CLA post, and he would need to actually oversee 6 working groups. Under the current structure, there are only 3 units now. There are going to be 6. I'm worried that if these CLA posts were created and the CLA has to oversee, 6 units, would he be able to cope with the workload? Mr. Liu? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your support. The creation of the CLA post is actually a directorate post, and his or her responsibility is certainly not small. He had to, supervise many people. There are 6 units. Apparently, there are many people who would need to, supervise. But then we also have, other landscape architects to assist the CLA in performing its duties. So I think the present arrangement is satisfactory. For the landscape unit, do you have it already, or are you just about to set this up? Now, after we've created the CLA post, we're going to establish the landscape unit. Chairman, regarding landscaping, well, Director talked about, quality city, and also you talk about promoting Hong Kong and encourage people to walk, the so-called walk in Hong Kong. So I hope the government would consider setting up a landscape department. There are many professions which are represented by a department. So I hope that this could also be done. And I hope that the government will consider that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your suggestion. Mr. Olof Hin, your first round. Thank you. I have several questions regarding the functions of this post. You are proposing to create the post of the CLA. One of the responsibilities of the CLA is to help promote an urban forestry strategy. If I understand this correctly, I think there is an urban forestry working group which was set up last year for a term of 2 years. So what I'd like to know is that, is it that you already have worked out an urban forestry strategy and that's why you are creating this post? But when I search online, I haven't seen any such strategies. And secondly, I'm also concerned about certain issues relating public administration. You're now creating the CLA post, and people are concerned. Now, the landscape architects have their own professional opinion, but there are very often conflicts of difference of opinion among different departments. The CEDD is in charge of government projects. I wonder why, for example, the LCSD, which is also involved in tree management, but that department is not involved. So when they have proposed any minor works, for example, and consider whether you need to fell a tree or how to, plant the trees in a better manner. If there is any conflict of opinion, how do you resolve that? Or is it that you can resolve all the problems through a meeting? The Development Bureau has talked about, a tree management office. So what role will that office play? Thank you, Mr. Au. Regarding the urban forestry strategy, the two posts that we are proposing to create will take up the duties of the chief landscape architects. Part of the duties is tree management, but that's not all of their responsibilities. As for the LCSD and why is it, for example, the LCSD is not involved? It all depends on the work that the department has to perform, and then we will find the appropriate post and the appropriate person to perform the work. As I said, landscape architects does not just manage trees. His core duties include, for example, planning, design, and managing the outdoor environment, and also indoor planting, the selection of plant species, and so on. So his work is involve a lot more than just managing trees. I understand many landscape architects are concerned that the title is confused with that of the arborist. I hope the landscape architects will not mind, because they have their own role to play. So does the arborist. My other question is that for these two grades, now in your present proposal, based on your present proposal, how can the two grades collaborate in a better manner? So the government, I'm still puzzled. You talk about the urban forestry strategy. You're saying that you want to proceed with this, but yet I don't understand what your strategy is. I think we all know, for example, that recently in the Central and Western District, there have been a lot of controversies over trees. Professor Chiu Shi Wai had pointed out that when the government decides whether or not to fell any trees, the government's list doesn't say whether the trees should be felled, in 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months' times. So I think that would have an impact on how you would actually take care of those trees. And this is something that you should review. But I don't see that you have any strategy yet, and you are still proposing to create this post. So how can we understand how the CLA what will be the division of labor among between the CLAs? Regarding division of labor, we've already said that different departments have their different responsibilities. For the urban forestry strategy, I'll ask Mr. Lam, the Deputy Secretary, to give you the details as to how our colleagues, coordinate. The landscape architects and the arborists work as a team. The arborist expertise is the understanding of trees and tree management, including the determination of the state of health of the trees, risk assessment, and so on and so forth. So they are more. I understand the division of labor. What I can't easily understand is is the CLA. Perhaps you can answer my question in my second round. Okay, Dr. Chiang. Thank you. We understand that we are now more and more concerned about the role of landscape architects, especially because we are now seeing global warming, and we are asking what more kind of trees should we grow more in Hong Kong. We also, water resources are becoming more and more depleted. If you grow more trees, like last week we had almost 10 days or more than 10 days where we had very extremely high temperature. I know that many trees couldn't, couldn't survive, especially seedlings. Many of them have died. So I think, therefore, that it is necessary that we need to enhance our service. I understand we have now 90 chief CLAs or senior landscape architects and so on. Do we have an establishment of 90? 80 landscape architects? Do you think that in future you need to continue to recruit more landscape architects? What is your estimate of the demand going forward? We will monitor the workload. If there's a need to hire more landscape architects, we will ask for more, apply for more resources to recruit more landscape architects. Madam Chair, I'm still worried when by the time you need to hire a few more landscape architects, there may be a shortage of talents. In Hong Kong, there are only 100 or so licensed landscape architects. And landscape architects basically are trained at Ivy. And I understand Hong Kong U is also organizing some courses. I don't know what is the level of training they provide. I think your department should know what the future development should be, and I think you should tell them how many people they should train. And also, training is not just about book learning. To a very large extent, I mean, landscape architects are like doctors. They need a long period of, field practice, because if you don't have any field experience, it wouldn't work. So, for the CLA and the senior landscape architects post, what are the qualification requirements? Mr. Liu, Madam Chair, I'll ask Ms. Wong to answer the question. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Dr. Cheng's question regarding the CLA, it is by internal promotion. Right now, we have more than 10 senior landscape architects. We will look at their performance and their experience, and then we will promote them. What are their qualifications? For all our recruitment requirement is that the candidate will need to be a registered landscape architects. Namely, they will need to be licensed by the Institute of Landscape Architects. And that means that, first of all, they have to be recognized. They have to graduate from a course recognized by the Institute of Landscape Architects. After they work for 2 years, they can sit for an examination to obtain a license. After they've obtained a license for a year, they need 1 year's field experience before they can be registered. Is it that only someone with a master's degree from Hong Kong you can become a registered landscape architect? We've met with them last week, and we understand that so far they only recognize the MA, qualification from the Hong Kong U. What about those who graduate from the Education University, Hong Kong Space, and also people who have been trained overseas? For overseas graduates, if the degree is recognized in the jurisdiction concerned, I understand that the Institute of Landscape Architects also will recognize the degree. Why in Hong Kong you only recognize the Hong Kong U degree and not the other institutions? My understanding is that for the other universities, they are still, conducting their accreditation. So far, only Hong Kong U and VDC have accredited programs. I think this is important as far as prospect for young people is concerned. Everybody wants to go to Hong Kong U, but sometimes the Hong Kong U has a very limited quota, and if they enroll for the Ivy or the Hong Kong space programs, many of these people have worked in the field for many years already, and they're so conversant with this subject. It's just that they don't have the Hong Kong U master's degree, and therefore they cannot become registered as landscape architects and join the government. So to some extent, I think you should review the situation.
So the government can consider that. My question. So for the post of landscape architect, the head of grade, is it Mr. Wong? Who's the head of grade? Yes, it's the permanent secretary of the Development Bureau. But he's not a professional landscape architect, right? No. Chairman, well, the head of grade, well, it is, of course, it's in a leadership role. We would still rely much on Ms. Wong, the head of greening, and she's also with the Development Bureau. I never really heard of the head of grade not being a professional. You said that, you mentioned Ms. Vina Wong, but you are in a D1 grade, right? But how can a D1 grade staff supervise D2 staff? The creative position is D2. So it's D1, it's also D1 post. If they're at the same level, how can one supervise the other? Would you upgrade Ms. Wong later on? Her level? Yes, thank you for your view. I will consider that. It's not my view. It's a question for me. And the secretary, or permanent secretary. Can you answer me? It's like Parkinson law. Would you upgrade her status? Yes. Ms. Wong's position is one that she wouldn't supervise other landscape architects. Her role is to supervise senior landscape architects and the other architects, their professional development. And she will deal with their not promotions, but deployment issues and training matters. How to ensure that the grade can be better developed within the civil service. And Ms. Wong, right now, in the civil service, there are only 2 government landscape architects with the new post that before chief landscape architects. And the 4 of them will closely work together to help develop the grade itself. At least it's about, the sustainable development, professional development of landscape architects, and also landscape policies. On those policies, Ms. Wong is involved. So that when we formulate policies, it won't be the Development Bureau just deciding on their own among themselves. We would have broad consultations with departments with LA, landscape architects. So Ms. Wong, I know you are the head of Greening and Landscape Office, but above her is Ms. Kwok Man Ki. So there's someone senior at D2 level. So why isn't she supervising landscape architects instead? She also from the Landscape and Tree Management Office. Why is she not supervising? I think in terms of supervision, she's not supposed to supervise chief landscape architects in other departments. Her role is mainly about formulating policies to deal with landscaping issues or issues related to the grade. Is the CLA. Of course, they work with Ms. Kwok, and if necessary, Ms. Kwok would give her views. Because they're all responsible for various aspects. So me too. So I will overlook the training plan for LAs, and what more we can do. For example, earlier on, in the Architectural Services Department, when they wanted to open the post, there was much discussion on relationship between arborists and LA. So how many arborists are there now, and who is their head of grade? Arborists within the civil service, there isn't a grade for them. There isn't a grade. How many of them there are now? In the government, there are about 300 arborists. But in the past, we listened to electrical members' views, and therefore recently in our office, we conducted some training sessions to help landscape architects learn more about being an arborist and to get the qualification for arborist. It's a kind of value addedness training for them. And this is also to ensure that the tree management office and the landscape section can actually have staff capable of being arborists. So your arborists are scattered among various departments. Yes. Next one, Fernando Zhang, first round. Thank you, Chairman. I don't quite get it, what Ms. Lam tried to explain about Ms. Wong, the D2 post. What was the duties of the D2 post above her? I think, Chairman, you asked a very good question. Ultimately, we hope to see more greening in Hong Kong, and that Hong Kong becomes more sustainable and livable. Therefore, posts of landscape architects should be given more importance. And also for basic infrastructure projects, road works, road building projects, or highways or CEDD projects, we hope that there can be sustainable considerations and also creation of a sustainable and livable environment in the design aspect. But I found that still all the answers we've got tend to show that the landscape architects are only playing a supplementary role, whether it's for CEDD or highways department, whenever they had to develop new concrete projects or works. The little space left, well, it's only the little space left in those projects that the landscape architects will be called upon to do their own design work. I think in terms of the structure, it doesn't really show, as mentioned in the paper, how we are really striving to foster sustainability and livability. So in terms of the structure, okay, let's look at the organizational chart. In enclosure 3, under CEDD, under the assistant director, I think, well, that's Ms. Wong. And then when it comes to consideration on how to influence various projects to make sure there's more greening, more trees, incorporated, more space, how can the creative post actually enhance that? Particularly just then Ms. Lam kept saying that she's only looking at development and training work. So it has nothing to do with projects, infrastructure projects. So how can a new post, newly created posts, enhance the overall planning and design? Under Secretary? Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Yes, when we have new towns or areas built, we want to create also a sustainable and quality environment. Therefore, we attach importance to the design of the space. But in planning for a new town, you need also some professionals, of course, including landscape architects. At the early stage of our planning, besides a planning outline, as I said, we also need to have an overall landscape planning. So it's not that after we've done all the infrastructure and then leave the landscape architects to fill in the gaps. For example, in any new town, you need to have a new space available, open space available, and often the open space will become the center point of a newly developed district. And that is something reserved in any overall landscape plan. My question is, Chairman, for the posts, how can they enhance or affect the design of the engineering works? So I asked to, official, please talk directly to the Chairman. Well, Chairman, on this issue, maybe I'll ask two departments to respond on the role of the landscape or chief landscape architects. So your answer, please. I'll invite two departments to respond. Yes, who will speak first? Please go ahead. Yes, on Mr. Jones' question. In our department, after we have created the CLA post, we would like to see that he can help us or she can help us formulate landscaping strategies in line with the Development Bureau's policy. For example, in some newly development areas for housing projects or infrastructural projects, they will, at the stage of designing for the landscape, I hope that they can come up with some guidelines and criteria so that their subordinates know what to follow. And also with the guidelines and criteria, I hope that they can be incorporated with the blue-green design concepts. And also we hope that the criteria can provide for the right kind of soil and plant species to be chosen to reach the goal of biodiversity. So through the enactment or formulation of such strategies, the quality of landscaping service can be enhanced. With the CLA in place, we hope that they can help formulate and implement a quality management system for projects so that when a project is first started till the design stage, till all the way to the implementation stage, we hope that at every segment we can ensure that there's a good quality service involved. So we hope that the CLA can achieve that. And also for our CEDD engineering projects, sometimes they could have an impact on trees. So we hope that through the CLA, we can have formulation of better preservation options. Just the members also mentioned that in our work, often we need to collaborate or communicate with various government departments. Say after we have finished some landscaping design, the trees concerned may need to hand it over to other departments for maintenance. So through the CLA, the directorate post, we can enhance or have more strengthened interdepartmental communication and coordination. So that's what our department hopes to achieve through the creation of the CLA post. James Toh, first round, Chairman. So follow up on the issue. So all the work you just mentioned, is it being done now by anyone? Well, as you said, like in paragraph 25, what it says, the strategies, say for anyone doing that now? So Highways Department, Mr. Chui, Deputy Director? Yes, in terms of the quality and nature of work, yes, in our landscape unit, there are colleagues following up on the work, but often, well, because we're proposing the creation of the CLA post for the reason that we want to enhance the level and quality of our work. So in response to what Mr. Jern was saying, is that landscape architects are only playing supplementary role? The answer is no. We exactly want to enhance the landscape unit to a landscape division level so that our work, as mentioned by the CEDD just done, we will formulate with the CLA's help criteria. And the criteria would not be just for our own internal staff alone. Any other projects for maintenance or repair for highways department, they would need to comply with the same criteria too. Well, I'm saying that if you have senior staff doing that kind of work now you're saying you want to have a higher grade post created, but do you really need to have that kind of grade to get the work done, because you're already doing the same thing right now? All of the work that you've mentioned, is there any overall strategy for, say, on greening or blue-green strategy? Is there one in place now? Do you have a central coordinating commission or department that would formulate policies and strategies? That would be more important, in my view. Or would the person doing the work now be promoted, Mr. Choi? Well, whoever is, to be the CLA post, if it's created, he would need to, follow the arrangement under the civil service for promotion. There are staff within the department to do all the kind of work, like in the highways department. I hope that you can explain to us. It's a bit not clear to us. So if you have people like someone called senior landscape architect doing the work now, and so why all of a sudden you have a CLA, given so much more supposedly powers? Mr. Choi, in terms of structure, individual staff are experienced and are able to do the work, but you need the relevant structure to support the work. So once we have elevated the unit to be a division, so it's like bridge construction division and so forth, then they will be in a position to come up with standards and to promulgate the standards to others. They will be at that level or in a position to promote or promulgate the standards. But now you don't have a CLA, and then there is a senior landscape architect in a unit, and they cannot create a manual, nor can they design strategies and criteria. Is that the problem? Is it too far-fetched that a division will have the abilities or the powers that the unit doesn't have right now? Well, you may have 2 more support staff like secretaries for the CLA. Is that all it's about? Mr. Choi, well, we want to have, under secretary, we want to have 2 permanent posts of CLA at directorate level, so as to enhance the management of landscape. In the past, for a LA or senior LA, when they were to give actual pragmatic advice, they would be limited to doing that because they're not at directorate level. But how many senior LAs do you have? There are several. CEDD or Highways Department have several senior LAs. So you're saying that the senior LAs now are just working on their own. There's no acting head above them? No head above them? But they are all at the same level. Can you answer the question, James? Well, thank you, Mr. James Toh, for your question and views. I think in terms of manage, there are some issues. Therefore, we want to create a CLA in every department. In the past, policy-wise, under the Development Bureau, we would set up strategy goals in line with landscaping. For example, blue-green eco-service networks and proper urban forestry and so forth. But because they are from different departments, so they are responsible for different speeds of work. And the various departments need to consider their own nature of work to decide on their actual practical guidelines and to set up their own quality assurance system so as to implement the central policy put before them. Next one is Wuchiwai first round. I think James Toh's question just then reflects that in the past, LAs in a project per se only plays a supportive role. or supplementary role. That is when you have an engineering project on board, so anything to do with greening will be done by or dealt with by the landscape architects. I'm not sure if my understanding is correct, but with the CLA, is it that in the future the CLAs themselves would become project or part of project management? That is, if there are appropriate plans that they can consider, they will be directly in charge of those plans. Because having a project being under the charge of CLAs and under engineers, could have a difference. They could serve different purposes. Your ways of doing it could be different as well. So that's my question, first part of my question.
我哋園景師咁少啦。
We have so few landscape architects, but so many engineers. We face different kinds of constraints, so how do you strike a balance? For example, in a construction site, perhaps you would feel a tree should be retained from a landscape perspective, but from an engineering perspective, retaining that tree might be very costly. So would the landscape architect make such decision, or is this not the case? Every tree on the roadside only has limited space, and you can see that most trees are surrounded by concrete. So in this regard, what strategies would a CLA come up with? Did the government or development bureau have any plans? How are you going to deal with the space available to trees? Do you have any specific plans? Mr. Liu, thank you for the question. Whenever we have a conflict between trees and works, what are we going to do? The Trees Management Office would play the role of middleman, and all various factors would be considered. Who is making the decision? Would the CLAs make the decision? The TMO would make the decision. Of course, there would be participation or input from the CLAs. So what is the role of the CLA under the Development Bureau? For the CLAs of the CEDD and Highways Department, I would invite the assistant directors to tell us more. When there's a conflict, what would you do? Would the decision be biased towards some tree management or conservation, or would at the end of the day the Development Bureau would make the call? Thank you very much. It really depends case by case. Of course, I know that, but this is about a possible bias. In the past, if we did not have such posts, and now with these posts, we might give greater weight to environmental protection and trees conservation. Thank you very much. I would not say that this is a case of bias, because we would make informed and balanced decisions each time. What about my two other questions? As for the roles of the CLAs, respectively, I would invite the colleagues from the CEDD and Highways Department to give more. As for the space and separation between trees, the Development Bureau has guidelines in place. What about the existing trees? The existing tree circles are never being expanded. They are often shrunk. in the future there would be better practice and guidelines. Mr. Ray Chan. Chairman, since I just returned from another meeting, please remind me if what I'm saying now is redundant. The paper talked about the development of blue-green eco-service networks. The permanent post of CLA under the CEDD, what would be his scope of work in terms of the blue-green eco-service networks? Apart from the Kai Tek Nola and the Tongchong River revitalization, as well as the development of the former Anderson Road quarry, what other projects would the CEDD carry out? Mr. Liu, I would take the second question, and for the first, I would invite the CEDD to speak. Apart from the example cited, we would try to make use of our existing river resources in the NDAs, for example, Hong Shui Kiu and Yuen Long South NDAs. There are certain river channels, and I want to revitalize these channels so that they can become blue-green eco-resources. Mr. Lai, Assistant Director, Deputy Director. In terms of the blue-green networks, if we have a CLA on board, we hope that he can participate in the works at an early design stage. And in an NDA, we might consider whether there could be eco-services such as stormwater retention lake and bioretention channel. The CLA would conduct strategic planning at an early stage, and he would follow up on the entire project, and hopefully we can enhance our landscape services. According to paragraph 25A3, it says the proposed CLA will implement an urban forestry management strategy which will result in the management of senescent trees in a proactive and preventive manner for public safety. So does it mean that you would fell the trees as soon as possible? The TMO has always been criticized that they did not do a good job in assessment, and a lot of trees are felled unnecessarily. And earlier at Bonham Road, 2 trees were felled, and there were yet other examples. And due to the controversy of felling trees, would the procedures be revised? For example, would trees compensation measures be or options be considered before felling the trees? Would you keep a list of trees that are vulnerable to the public? Mr. Choi, Deputy Director. Paragraph 25A3 talked about the urban forestry management strategy. The Highways Department is managing 600,000 trees currently. And we found that some species of trees have shown signs of aging, and that is why we are implementing a strategy for aging species, including the Taiwanese acacia. Does it mean that the trees would be felled as soon as possible? This is not the case. We would have to deal with the issue properly. We are now dealing with the Taiwanese acacia, and 50 or 60 years ago, they were planted in Hong Kong as part of the greening. we saw that many acacia trees have aged and they must be dealt with properly. It doesn't mean we would fell them as soon as possible. It's about replacing the species. And we would communicate with the stakeholders in the districts in order to come up with a consensus on what to do. So we would not try to take down the trees as soon as possible. This is just not the case. This is the case for acacia trees, but what about other species? Dr. Elizabeth, thank you. Many people are concerned about the conservation of trees and what we can do against climate change. The CLA would take care of tree management. Would you adopt latest technologies in monitoring and conserving trees? Are you going to use technology to carry out the tasks you listed? I do not see any mentioning of the use of technology. For trees conservation, we often argue over the state of the trees, and we know that a lot of technologies, including IoT and sensoring, can help monitor the health of trees. Why is the government reluctant to do anything, and are you going to consider it now? Ms. Lam, thank you very much for the question. We hope to make more use of technology, and as we said in the paper, the Highways Department is conducting remote photography, and the trees are being monitored for their health, and the changes in their health can also be monitored. This is a pilot exercise, and some trees might require additional attention, for example, stone wall trees, and we are going to install sensors at those trees, and from those sensors we can see whether the trees can withstand strong wind. If this is viable, we can introduce new elements in our future trees management system. Recently, we saw that new technology is available from the UK, and optical fibers are utilized to detect the stability of the trees. I agree with Dr. Quad that we ought to explore the options. People have an affection towards trees, so every time trees have to be removed, there would be divided sentiments. So there would be different views. So I hope that a mechanism can be introduced to monitor the state of the trees, and technology can be deployed to monitor their health and how we can salvage those trees. So the top priority would be to rescue the trees instead of felling them. Chairman, I asked whether the Unit 3 would take care of the preservation of trees through technology, or would you outsource the work? For certain work, for example, the remote photography is carried out by the Highways Department. We are working with a foreign company in that exercise. For the other area of work, we are working with local universities and Friends of the Earth. For the project involving sensors, for the rest, we are still exploring the options, so the work is not necessarily outsourced. The TMO would monitor the use of technology. Would the TMO have dedicated staff to look at the use of technology in preserving trees. The TMO plays different functions, and we might not have a dedicated team to work on technology. But we are indeed monitoring the use of technology, including myself. And we would keep tabs on the accuracy of different techniques. If the government had started using technology earlier, a lot of our trees would not be felled, and we can avoid a lot of controversy. So you should really launch the work extensively with this new post. Mr. Martin Liang, first round. With the creation of a permanent CLA post under the CEDD and Highways Department, the CLA headquarters would be restructured into a landscape division, and each department currently has 3 senior landscape architects and 10 landscape architects, as well as 20 other architects. And with the 2 new CLA posts, there would be 9 directorate and 6 non-directorate posts respectively. So what kind of work would these new posts entail, and how did you come up with the projection or the establishment projection? In terms of supporting housing developments and greening works, what would be your consideration? I would invite the 2 deputy directors to offer more details. Mr. Lai, the division work is listed in enclosure 3. With the introduction of senior landscape architect posts, we would have 6 teams. Some of our projects involve consultants, while others are executed by our colleagues. So for landscape architects, for consultancy projects, our LAs would provide landscape advice. For projects taken up by our own teams, the landscape architects would participate more directly in landscape design and supervision. The third type is the management of trees under our department. We do not manage as many trees at the Highways Department. We only manage about 900, or rather 9,000 trees. But the work is not permanent in nature. With the completion of the works, they would be handed over to the maintenance departments, and for the last few years, we saw about 20,000 trees. And our staff would see whether trees need to be moved or removed. Mr. Choi, Deputy Director. With the 6 non-director posts under the Highways Department, they include 1 senior landscape architect and 2 LAs, as well as 3 landscape officers or technical support posts. The introduction of these posts aim to enhance road planning and landscape input in these projects. And we want to also enhance the management of our landscaping assets. The landscape unit of the Highways Department currently has more than 60 staff, and there must be higher steer. That's why we propose a new CLA post. Chairman, the two deputy directors offered a lot of details, but these are not included in enclosure 3. He talked about landscape services and landscape advice. So next time you should explain these more clearly in the paper. Second round, Mr. Eddie Chu. Thank you, Chairman. Further to my previous question, the Undersecretary talked about the new development areas under the CEDD.
And of course, you have a role to play in the master layout plan. For example, at the initial stage, you will have to work on the design of the roads. So I'd like to go back to the Highways Department. I'd like to continue with, we'll still stick to the example of the pedestrian walkway in Yuen Long. Since we have the Deputy Director of Highways, Ms. Wong Chow-Wan, present, Madam Wong Chow-Wan, I would like you to answer this question. With the CLA, hired under the Highways Department, does this CLA have the authority to, is it going to provide, do anything to resolve the hot island effect in Yuen Long? Can he do anything to make sure that this scenario will not really, arise? I'll ask the Highways Department to first of all answer the question. Mr. Chen. I think for individual works projects and the works that we propose, very often there are all kinds of considerations behind the proposal. For this Yuen Long project, we need to actually improve the traffic, pedestrian traffic. So in the whole process, we have different professional grades involved, including our engineers and also our landscape architects participating in the whole planning of the project. And the landscape architects will not only look at the vegetation, but the landscape architects would also need to provide the professional expertise regarding the landscape aspect so that the external appearance is going to be acceptable. The landscape unit also provides secretariat service, something that is regarding the external appearance of our structures and the landscape design. They will provide inputs for discussion, and the committee would also include different professional, from outside, including landscape architects, and other, representatives of other organizations, so that they can discuss the landscape design. I understand, Deputy Director, but the final outcome is such that we can see clearly who actually plays the leading role and who will play a minor role. Because here you are proposing to build a big concrete block, and the architects say that you should provide wider pavements, and you veto the option to provide more greening. Now, if the CLA, were to participate in the whole process and we cannot rectify the problem, why do we still need the CLA? If it doesn't have any new inputs to contribute, You say, for example, you talk about your urban forestry strategy, and you want to, reduce the hot island effect and so on. So after you've, employed the CLA, what will be the difference? We want to see how your policy is going to be implemented. I asked you this question regarding this example. I'm saying that this is a very bad example. Would you agree, first of all? Would you agree that this is a very bad example? Secretary. When we apply for the creation of these two CLA posts, if we were to discuss, an individual case, that would not be appropriate because there are many different considerations. So, Chair, you're just asking us not to talk about specific examples. We're just talking in the abstract. What's the point of talking in the abstract? Madam Chair, or the Chair already criticized you on the subject of the structure. Why don't you give me a simple answer? I don't think we're being too abstract. For all the different views regarding the building of highways and roads, eventually the Director of Highways makes the decision. The Director will listen to the views from all the different, stakeholders. The COA being a Directorate officer, I'm sure the Director of Highway will attach a lot of importance to his inputs as well. Mr. Lok Hin, your second round. Thank you. I'd like to go back to my earlier question. I fully understand why these different departments will need to engage the CLAs. Otherwise, you would have to rely on the engineers, because engineers have but this is not feasible because the engineers have their own other duties. So the landscape architects will do the work regarding landscape design. But what I don't understand is that other departments are doing similar work, like the LCSD. Mrs. Yip, I don't know whether you know this or not. Recently in Up Lei Chau, the residents have successfully fought for the planting of trees in the middle of the road. The Transport Department was responsible for building the planters in the road divide, and then the LCSD will decide on what trees to be planted. And then there's another argument, because if you were to plant taller trees, people cannot look at the people on the other side of the road. And some people will say that we must plant grass there instead. So some departments may have their CLA, but others do not. That's my first point. And secondly, no matter how many CLAs you hire in different departments, what we need in Hong Kong is to have a proper management philosophy and strategy. That's why in my first round I asked you this question. You now have an advisory committee on urban forestry strategy. What are these strategies? I don't see any strategies. If I go back to the paper again, in paragraph 19, you're saying that you propose to create this post in order to implement the urban forestry strategy. Regarding the urban forestry strategy, I have my own opinion. I said that even the TMO, when it decides to fell a tree, the process is really problematic. There is no space to indicate whether you should fell the tree immediately within 6 months or what. Since we don't want to continue to have all these strategies involving the felling of trees and so on, I think I agree that you should review your strategy, but you've not done that. And now you're proposing to create new post. So could you explain to us what exactly is the urban forestry strategy? Mr. Liu, I'll ask our Deputy Secretary, Mr. Lam, to explain the urban forestry strategy. Regarding why some departments have COAs and others do not, it really depends on the work and responsibility and the workload of the departments concerned. For departments which have the need, if we see that there is a need for this post, we will apply for the creation of those posts. And that's why 3 departments are now applying to create this post. Ms. Lam, thank you. We do have an urban forestry strategy. And there are several. We're now asking different departments to follow. First of all, we should really, plant trees properly. I think right now we have many trees planted, 20, 30 years ago. They were the wrong species planted in the wrong places, and that's why we are asking different departments to ensure that they plant the proper trees in a proper manner. And we've also conducted some consultancy studies. That is, what kind of species are suitable for planting on our narrow streets, and that we should actually plant more local species, so that they will not be affected by insects that much. That is an important strategy. The other important aspect would be biodiversity. Previously, the trees that we planted could be a whole cluster of pine trees or acacia trees, and when when something goes wrong with those trees, the whole cluster of trees will suffer, and that is not the best way to plant trees. So that's why we are now, going to promote biodiversity, because some trees can help create, substances to expel insects, and also to produce nutrients for the soil that can sustain other trees. And we are attaching a lot of importance to that. Thirdly, members also have asked this question earlier, that is whether the landscape architects only play a minor role. That is, when a flyover or footbridge is built, they just ask to plant a few trees there. That's not true. They will focus more on the strategies. I've mentioned about the blue-green eco-service and so on. We want to ensure that we do not just plant trees that can help improve the air quality and the ventilation, so that the residents would have a better living environment. For example, when we build rain gardens, we hope that during heavy rains, the trees can help, absorb some of the water, so that our drains will not burst and that there won't be any floods. In terms of tree management, we need to conduct risk assessment in a timely manner. For certain trees, we may need to conduct such assessments once every 6 months. For the others, once a year. If we need to remove any trees, do we just rely on a single form? That's not really so. First of all, we have a form saying that this tree is under serious risk, and then we will conduct many rounds of reviews. So we have all kinds of guidelines in place, and very often the public is very concerned about trees, and therefore before we remove any trees, we would liaise with the relevant organizations concerned. But in the end, I think different stakeholders would have different views. Like Dr. Kwok suggested that we should rely more on technology so that we can collect more evidence to justify our decision. And I welcome that suggestion, and we're also working towards that direction. Mr. Chu previously had pointed out that since the public has such a lot of attachment to the trees, and we shouldn't, likely remove those trees. Could we, for example, use the trees which have been felled and make souvenirs out of them? And this is something which we have taken on board, and these are the things that we will, incorporate under our tree management strategy. So, all right, it's my second round. I understand. Oh, Dr. Chang, okay, you're back. So your first round. Madam Chair. For the public housing estates, are you also responsible for the landscape design, or is this the responsibility of the housing department? Madam Chair, that would be the responsibility of the landscape architects under the housing department. Well, I've said earlier that I have found that in some of the new public housing estates like Tak Long, the newly planted trees would wither very soon. I don't know whether it's due to the weather or is it the wrong species for the location. I actually pointed out a problem earlier, before. And in Homan Tin, near Homan Estate, the residents have also complained about the wood cotton there. Dr. Chiang, he's not going to answer your question because this is under the responsibility of the T and H Bureau. So there have been complaints that there's so much wood cotton around. Now coming back to highways, I also have a picture here. On many of the highways, I'm sure they're under your jurisdiction. In the middle of the expressway, you very often would plant trees there or vegetation. But very often what you planted in the road divide are dying or withering. Now this is actually a photo referred to me by a citizen that is outside the Polytechnic University near the Hong Ham Tunnel. What have you planted there? These are actually weeds. And on top you have all kinds of panels there. So who is really responsible for this? Is it the highways? I think you need to follow up on that. You spend so much money to hire the landscape architects. I hope you can really give us a more beautiful environment. The trees that you grow there simply don't grow at all. They're like withered grass. Many people pass by the Hong Ham Cross Harbour Tunnel. It really is not a good sight. Madam Chair, we will certainly follow up on this case after the meeting. Okay, Dr. Chang? If you're going to follow up on that after the meeting today, I asked two other questions earlier. First of all, we understand that the Institute of Landscape Architects only recognize the graduates of the landscape architects from Hong Kong U. But other than landscape architects and senior landscape architects and chief and COAs, for the CLA, you can certainly require them to have MA degrees from Hong Kong U. But what about the assistant landscape architects? For those who have been trained by other universities, you should consider, recruiting them onto your team. I hope you will consider that. The CSB, I think they really would, depend on your requirements. In respect of the different departments, you need, talents with expertise in landscape architects. So I think you should relax the restrictions so the more people could join the profession. There are only about 100 or so licensed landscape architects. What is going to be the future demand? Just for your department alone, how many do you need? Dr. Chang, you've asked this question before. You're just repeating yourself. I'll ask Mr. Liu to answer your question once again. I'm just saying that we're asking whether they can give us the information after the meeting. We're happy to supply the information after the meeting. Mr. Liu, I'll go for my second round now. Shortly before, early on, the ASD created the CLA post. Now it's the CEDD and the Highways Department. So for the other departments under the Development Bureau, like the Lands Department, the DSD, the WSD, will they also be steadily creating a similar post of CLA? Well, Madam Chair, we don't have any plans now to create a post of CLA in the other departments. It really depends on the work relating to landscaping for those departments. and whether or not we can justify the creation of a COA post in those departments. So you're going to maintain with 3 D1 posts plus the COA within our bureau. So there are 4 altogether, and the head is your permanent secretary. I don't object to your creation of these 2 posts. Given that the felling of tree is so controversial, so is the conservation of trees. Ms. Lam referred to the Taiwanese Acacia many times, and the Ombudsman had proactively, intervened with the treatment of the trees outside the Tang Chiong library outside of Hong Kong University. Of course, you are, Ms. Kwok is an urban designer. Your colleague is also expert in the field. Will the government really consider hiring an arborist with, high-level qualification to give you the advice every time you want to, fell a tree, so that you won't have so many people objecting to your felling of any trees, and that the ombudsman will need to step in. Why won't you consider hiring someone, an arborist at a senior level? Madam Chair, we'll be happy to consider your suggestion.
You don't really have to create the post. You can hire a consultant to work for a few years first. Is that possible? Chairman, we'll actively consider that. And if we have any view formed, then we'll report to you ASAP. First round, Kwok Wai Kong. Thank you, Chairman. Of course, with the CLA, we would expect that frontline staff would have more promotional opportunities, and whereas LAs can be promoted directly, or do we need to hire from outside? That's one question. If this was asked before, please let me know. I was next door actually. And for CEDD and Highways Department create the posts, I tend to support the idea because we do hope that projects can have more greening elements and beautification aspects. But let me remind you this. In the past, we've noted that plants on the roadsides, often maybe because of the species or because of a lot of the engineering works reserve little space for planting and little soil is there, so therefore you can't really plant tall trees. And even small plants may not be suitable. If you plant large trees there, and there may not be enough room for them to grow further in the future. So for your upcoming projects, please consider more carefully. Try to, for any greenery spots, please try to allow for more breadth and depth for the soil. Because if you don't have enough room for the root to grow and to be firm, then they will be very weak and could be attacked and even fall during a rainstorm. So you need to think thoroughly so as to avoid trees or plants from being felled in the future, because that will be something we need to be will be held responsible for. So you need to do your projects more carefully. And for design works, please note that, say, in the case of MTRC in the South Island Line, Wang Chuk Hang Station, you outsource the work to MTRC. But in some places where they have strong views on them planting species under a bridge in areas where there's no sunlight. And in the end, no plants was grown, but just rubbish is accumulated there. So I hope that when you grow plants, try to find spots where there's exposure to sunlight and water. If you plant species in a dead corner, then it doesn't actually achieve anything. Mr. Liu? Thank you, Mr. Kwok. On what the promotional prospects, yes, our thinking is that for the CLA, we hope that it can be filled by senior LAs. If we can't find a suitable candidate, then we would consider hiring from outside. Just then, your third and second views, we do agree. We do hope that we can have the landscape architects involved in the early stages of design, so we know way in advance where there can be spots for beautification or greenery projects. And Chairman, I also mentioned before that Aberdeen Centre, you and I are both concerned about the trees on the pavements. Because of a limited space, the trees now are covering the roads. So last time when I met with the Undersecretary, they did some improvement works there. But I hope that in the days ahead, if the same situation occurs, please take follow-up action quickly, proactively, because we don't want any elderly people to be trapped. Okay. First round, Holden Chow. Second round, Elizabeth Quad. Who else has questions? We've spent almost 2 hours on this item already. The third round is Ao Lau Hee. Any more? Any other members? Because I need to reserve time for a break. Chu Hoi Dick, third round. Any more? Okay, Holden Chow, first round. Thank you, Chairman. Actually, I just want to provide a opinion. You want to create the CLA post in the highways department. I do not object to that. But my view is that in the past, based on my understanding, on roadsides we see lots of trees, whether they are planted or protected. I'm sure they are being managed by the highways department. But from planting to preserving, I'm sure you should have a team doing that, right? Doing the base work. Or have you outsourced the work? If you have your own staff doing the base work, then that's easy. But if you outsource the work, that is the planting and maintaining to outside companies, I do have reservation, because now you're going to create the post of CLA. Please let us know in the future how he can liaise with various districts. You know, Hong Kong, there's so many places where people have expressed concern about trees or grass with problems on the streets. And then once the problems are identified, highways department will need to deal with them. So can the CLA make sure that there's proper supervision of the plants? Should you have outsourced the plants to outside companies, you need to make sure that they do a good monitoring work of the plants on roadsides. Because now that you have this new post, if he cannot take care of the actual cases happening in various districts where people have complained about, then it will be a waste of opening the post if nothing is due to address the concerns around Hong Kong. Can you tell me what your plan is? Thank you, Chairman. Undersecretary, I'll ask Deputy Director, Mr. Choi, to answer. Thank you. Yes, we would do the work. All the forestry being managed by us. To our department, that's an important aspect of our work. We have 1,100 hectares forestry area and 600,000 trees to be managed. So with the CLA, one of its main tasks will be to review and oversee our current operations to make sure that we have proper management of forestry and trees. And right now, we have outsourced the work of managing and repairing the trees. But we internally, we have our own staff to carry out inspections and ensure that the system works. Of course, as we have a bigger number of trees to be managed and the need to enhance our quality, because we do want to ensure our management of forestry, so that would be one of the tasks or duties of CLA to achieve that, have better enhancements. Yes, if that's the case, then one more question on my part. Since you have outsourced some of the work and the CLA, as I said, we need to supervise the contractor's work, then if a contractor doesn't do a good job or their maintenance work is not up to standard, then in the past, have you ever imposed any penalties on any contractors? You need to make sure that they would not be able to get any more jobs if they are not performing. Mr. Choi? Yes, in the past, road repairs work, they're done on district basis, and they also include management of the landscape. So in the past, when we came across cases of this protection of plants where we are not satisfied with, we would deduct payments from the contractors. And in the contractors report, we also note our dissatisfaction. And in the days ahead, the CLA to be hired will review our current system and see whether there's any room for improvement. Okay, last point, Chairman. I hope that the CLA can do a good supervision work for the contractors who are doing substandard work. You must impose penalties. I hope that the CLA, now that the post is to be created, I hope they can really do an effective monitoring work. Thank you. Second round, Elizabeth Quart. Thank you, Chairman. In the government's paper, it's mentioned that the CLA post, one of its duties is to enhance the ability of the city to combat climate change. So I'd like to know, how can we enhance our ability to withstand climate change? How can we do that? Are we using technology? Are we making good use of technology to handle or tackle climate change? For example, you can try to use proper or large-scale greening to reduce the heat island effect, to reduce the temperature. You know that we're so hot here in our city. Can we use technology, sensoring technology in various districts and GIS technology that can let us know the temperature distribution in different districts, and then try to have more plants grown in the particular hot areas to reduce temperature? There could be more rainstorms ahead too. We have seen more rainstorms, indeed. So we can use various systems to issue warnings about chances of storms and get preparation work done early on. But have you really done study, or have you got staff or plans to cope with climate change? Are you just bluffing? Or would you really get the work done by using big data? Our CEDD's Deputy Director, Mr. Lai, to answer. Yes. Just Ms. Quart's questions. In our paper, paragraph 10, where it mentions the development of a blue-green eco-service, we cited examples, say in developing new areas, or in the Anderson Road quarry site, previous quarry site, we do have planning for carrying out we will do the flood attenuation lakes, artificial flood attenuation lakes, so that when it rains, it can have the effect of containing the flood and reducing the pressure on the downward stream. So that's one example of enhancing our capabilities to combat or tackle climate change. And there's also the examples of rain gardens and so forth. Okay, I understand. Mr. Kwok? Yes. All you mentioned, examples for new development areas. If you don't do that in new development areas, and of course that will be problematic. So of course you need to do that. But what I was asking in the beginning was that within our city we have now come under the effect of heat island effect. So we need to find ways to reduce urban temperature. Greenery is one way to reduce that. So have you got any plans to carry out any study at all? As I said, to see whether we can add sensoring systems in various districts, monitoring systems, so that we know and detect beforehand and know what should be our priorities. in increasing greeneries in areas where the temperatures could be very high. Chairman, it seems like they never thought about that. That is my suggestion. So now, since that you're going to create a post, the public will have their own expectations, so does LegCo. So you must study what I mentioned. Otherwise, 1 year later, you will come back and be asked the same question again. So you need to really think along that line. I think they may want to leave it to the plans for developing smart city, but it's the department that needs to come up with the ideas and plan suggestions. Yes, please think about it. Yeah, I agree. You can talk about the issue with the Innovation and Technology Bureau. I know engineers are used to using the brick and mortar approach, but you might need to think of the suggestions made. Supplements, yes. In CEDD, we are already for various districts mapping, creating greenery maps. Yes, I was involved in that. The zoning outlines zoning plan for greenery plan for various districts, so they know where there can be plants grown. But the intention for doing the greenery maps is not so much to tackle climate change. So now that you have the new posts of CLA and we are developing smart cities, so please move ahead and to get prepared for the city. Yes, thank you. We'll think about it. Yes, so the two CLAs should talk more with the Innovation and Technology Bureau or the Commission, because this is something that we need to look at from the perspective of smart city. Okay, third round, 2 members are in the third round, Ao Loh Hin and Chu Hoi Dik, and then after that we'll have to take a vote on this item. We've spent more than, almost 2 hours on this item. We need to take a break afterwards. Mr. Ao? Yes, I want to first of all thank Ms. Lam for taking us through the urban forestry strategy. But the Consultation Committee in the beginning of the year is supposed to last 2 years now. Actually, more than 1.5 years have passed. If you had not explained it, I wouldn't have known the details. I hope that the administration, I don't know whether you finished the review, but I hope that for all the relevant areas being reviewed and your plans underway, they will be of concern to the public. So I'd like to see whether you can really make public more information about the outcome of the review. And as for tree management risk assessment, I think we haven't done a proper review yet. But now we are having the posts created. It seems like we are putting the cart before the horse. I think at different government departments, if you were to have CLAs, no matter what, you need to have interdepartmental collaboration. Otherwise, if it's just CEDD acting on its own, according to its own menu, and then the other department works in its own way, then there will be problems. I don't think that's what you want to see anyway. So I hope that we can get a better job done. And let me also reiterate that for tree management, there are so many issues involved. I don't know whether the committee has reviewed properly the matter. Otherwise, the ombudsman would not have taken the initiative to investigate what happened. Just then Ms. Ip also commented on it. So let me say that I think the investigation would look into the process, decision-making process, okay, in relation to the felling of the trees. I'm not saying that all your strategies would need to be overturned, but how we can, get a better job done in the future and let various government departments avoid conflicts and do a better job in managing trees. I think that's what we expect, the future CLAs can handle and be involved in as well. Any more supplements? Okay. No. Okay, views noted. Third round. Eddie Chu. Thank you, Chairman. Just then, the Undersecretary. I think you misunderstood Miss Elizabeth Quat's question. She was quoting from paragraph 17 in the paper. Enhancing and enhancing the ability of the city to tackle climate change. So it's a question for Highways Department, and you ask CEDD to answer. What's the point? So the Highways Department had not really done anything to reduce urban temperature. So, Ms. Kwok, I hope that the bridge in Yunnan should not be given the approval. The Institute of Landscape Architects website on its first page highlights in 2003 the statement it issued back then. The statement reads that the Highways Department in the Yunnan Nola plans to build the 100-meter long bridge is something shocking to them, and they therefore strongly oppose to the department's plan to build the several 100-meter long bridge. So my question earlier, well, it hasn't been answered yet. The CLA is a professional grade, so they will be thinking about the heat island effect, and there's a need for more trees. We need to reduce the urban temperature. There needs to be more landscapes. We need to value the water bodies. And now you're creating the posts of CLA. So my question is, the Institute of Landscape Architects' strong condemnation of Highways Department engineers and district councillors' mentality of getting big structures, mega structures done. Okay, would that be changed? Is that your vision for the future?
With these new posts, would such situation persist? Perhaps we should allow Ms. Wong to address this issue. Do you want Ms. Vina Wong to take this question? Yes. Ms. Wong is the only landscape architect here. Landscape architects do participate in the exercise. For the society mentioned, the Hong Kong Institute of Landscape Architects are also involved. It's about who's taking the lead. Now the engineers are taking the lead. We need to cool down a city, but you are doing the opposite. You are making Yunnan even more crowded. Is this the vision of the government? I have no questions for the CEDD. I'd like to invite the Deputy Director of Highways to address the question first. Mr. Choi. I do not find it appropriate to consider who is taking the lead of the project, so to speak, because there are many factors to consider and different areas of expertise are needed. Would Ms. Vina Wong be able to speak? I'm not putting the question to the Deputy Director. Ms. Vina Wong, I would try to address the question. The project took place some years ago, and I wasn't with the Highways Department at the time, so I do not know the details. But as a landscape architect, and the government had certain functional requirements, and there was a certain traffic requirement, so perhaps Mr. Choi, the Deputy Director, can correct me if I'm wrong. But when we have a new project from a landscape architect's point of view, we would see whether the plan is compatible with the surroundings. As Mr. Chu said, with a footbridge covering a water body from a landscape perspective, it's not so ideal, but I'm sure different options have been looked at. For example, whether the surrounding footpaths can be widened, but we did not find these feasible. So I cannot say whether the current plan is the best one. We have a huge concrete column here. I'm not asking you to comment on this design. You acknowledge there are deficiencies from a landscape perspective, but my question was, with the new CLA post at the Highways Department, would these deficiencies be minimized? For the CEDD and Highways Department, if we have directorate staff on board, we could have offered early advice on the projects, and this might improve the designs of the projects. Any further questions from members? If not, I will put this item to the vote. Can we vote separately on the creation of the two posts? Yes, this is possible, but we do not have a quorum right now. We are one short, so the bell would be rung. The quorum bell would be rung.
冇人要記名啊？
我會要求路政署嗰個記名啊，主席。
I would claim a division for the votes on the CLA under the Highways Department. The division bell would be rung. We now have a quorum. I'd like to remind members that the Development Bureau proposes to create 2 permanent posts of Chief Landscape Architect at the CEDD and Highways Department respectively. This issue requires separate voting on both posts. posts. So we would first have a vote on whether members agree with the creation of a CLA in the CEDD.
咁個資源淨係要呢一個 division 定係兩個都要 division？ 你問清楚佢，佢係唔會改埋。
OK，
佢就唔佢冇要求呢個記名證。
OK， 得，嗯。
你唔好做電子投票先啦，因為呢個係淨舉手啫嘛，即係 CEDD 嗰個淨舉手啦，唔使咁。
嗱，先呢個第一個咧就係土木工程署。
We would first have a vote on the creation of the CLA post under the CEDD. Those in favor, please raise your hands. If there's unanimous support, there's no need to press a button. Does anyone object to the proposal? If not, the proposal is passed. We now proceed to the vote on the CLA under the Highways Department. A division is claimed. We now proceed to the vote. Please press the button. Before I announce the results, please check your votes. The results are displayed. "25 present, 18 for, 6 against." The item is passed. Do we need separate voting at the Finance Committee? Yes, for the creation of the post under the Highways Department. We will now take a 5-minute break.